Welcome to the 9 North Compass programs. 9 North is jumping into the community conversation on timely subject matter that has been magnified because of current events. Throughout 2021, 9 North will be hosting a series of listening sessions about important topics that impact your community. Today, we will be talking about the Minnesota foster care system. Foster care is temporary out-of-home care for children who cannot safely remain in their homes. In Minnesota, over 15,000 children experience the foster care system each year. On an average day, there are more than 9,000 children in care. Because of the increasing need, there are a lack of foster care homes available. There's a particular need for homes to take care for teenagers, who make up more than 1/4 of the youth in foster care. What are the factors that are contributing to the influx of youth in foster care? What goes into being a foster parent, and who can take this role on? And what safety nets are available to youth when they age out of foster care? And finally, what is our community doing to support our most vulnerable people? Today, we will be speaking to a panel of experts that can approach today's topic in different ways. Our panelists include Kim Young, foster care specialist with MN Adopt, and Deirdre Otis, a foster and adoptive mom of 9 children. We were going to have Naima Jinya on as well, but she is unavailable, and she is a former foster care youth and now a foster youth advocate. We have a series of questions today, but before we dive in, let's take a minute for our guests to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your professional background and personal background that's really led you to where you are today and why you wanted to join this conversation. So I'd like to start, Kim, with you first, and then Deirdre will follow up with you.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me today. My name is Kim Young, and I am the foster care and kinship specialist at MinAdopt. For those of you that aren't aware of what MinAdopt does, we provide information, support, and resources to foster, adoptive, and kinship families. So we aren't a placing agency, but rather support families from the very beginning of their process all the way through their adoption journey. In my specific role as the foster care and kinship specialist, I am the first point of contact for families in Minnesota that want to become foster care licensed. I will help connect them with their county or a private agency to get started on the licensing process. The kinship piece of my role includes connecting potential relatives that have a relative that has come into care and they'd like to be a foster care provider for that relative. So I help find those kids and connect them with the workers. Previous to my work here at MinAdopt, I was an adoption and foster care licensing worker with a private agency. So I'm always excited to talk about the need for foster families. There are so many children in care and we always need more families. So I'm really excited to be part of this conversation today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, Kim. We really appreciate your time. Now, Deirdre, can you provide us a little background about your story?
Sure. So we started by adopting a special needs child overseas. As very young, we were just married, and it was, as anyone knows in this world, quite an undertaking. And we dove in learning about treatment options, both physically for him and also just all the therapy that goes along with having reactive attachment disorder, having failure to thrive. But it really allowed us to see the need locally once we dove into these programs. So that's how we started our journey. We have 4 adopted children and 5 biological children. We've had 23 foster children as of this week through Ramsey County in the last 6 years. So
Wow.
we pretty much never not had a foster child in our home in the last 6 years. And just the number one thing I think learning for me is just that when we started this process, the mess or the pain or the difficulty has given us the greatest resources. So the tools that we have learned in the past, 20 years of parenting and 6 years actively as foster care providers really comes through those hardships. And anything else I say tonight will go back to that, just what are your tools and how do those help you be an advocate and a good both parent and foster parent?
Well, I'm really excited to learn about those tools. um, so to kick off our conversation today, I'd like to start with the nuts and bolts of the foster care system. So Kim, I'm hoping that you can lead us off on this. Can you explain to us what the process is going into the foster care system, how long a child may be in the system, and just kind of give us the general 10,000 foot overview of that?
Absolutely. So children come into foster care typically through child protection services. Every county has a child protection unit, and they may become involved from mandated reporters or the general public reporting concerns. Sometimes first responders are involved. And so children come into care through their county's child protective system. And if the decision is made to remove the children, then they would go into a foster home. And as far as the length of time, children can be in a foster home for, a few days, and sometimes many months, and sometimes even more than a few months. So it really varies on every situation and what is being asked of the biological families. But as quickly as possible, children, return to reunify with their families as soon as it is safe to do so. That's really the number one goal, is to reunify kids with their families.
Thank you for that overview. Now, Deidre, I'd like to talk a little bit about what a new placement looks like for you as a foster parent, and maybe how does your family prepare for it? Can you give us and it sounds like you have a recent new placement as well?
Mm-hmm. Well, in the foster care world, one differentiation that's helpful is there's shelter care and then there's longer term placements. And we are licensed for both. And when you start foster care, generally in Minnesota, not always, but I believe you pretty much start with providing foster care, not shelter care. And shelter care is when someone comes in, it's almost like the limbo where a child enters child protective services. They haven't determined yet if the child will stay in foster care or reunify very quickly. For example, I've had children come from a traffic stop where drugs were in the car, or from an emergency. And in those cases, it's very different. And that might be only 48 hours to a week of care versus a long-term placement. We had a foster daughter who was with us for 18 months, which in my experience is rather typical. It's very painful, but it is also depends on the situation. For example, we had our one foster daughter was with us for 10 months and she ended up reunifying with her grandmother. And we were able to, walk alongside them. In terms of back to your original question, what does that look like when they first come in? If it's a shelter placement, I might get 20 minutes notice. And shelter placements generally come in the middle of the night. And so an example last month was a sibling set was at Children's Hospital. And I got a phone call at midnight and they said, are you available? I said, yes. It took a little longer because of COVID testing and they arrived 2 hours later. So I just kind of stay up in my jammies, make a cup of tea, do my best. And then I on hand have porta cribs, toddler cribs, bunk beds, so whatever we need, I meet the kids. And if they're cognizant and able to make a choice, I have stuffed animals on hand. And then I let the child speak through the stuffed animal to choose the bed they'd like to stay in. And that's generally my very first step is this sense of, I'm Mama D. That's how I refer to myself. I open the door. We have a stuffed animal. The stuffed animal takes a tour and chooses a bed. That's generally our very first step.
That tour with the stuffed animal, that's a really interesting tool. So they are basically experiencing the home with almost like another being that's alongside with them.
Right.
Where did you get that? Where did you kind of glean that?
Made it up. I think that I started seeing the sense of just fear of talking and needing a little bit of a shield. And so it allowed me to not make direct eye contact. Also, we're often, maybe I have a child who comes with autism, or a child who's been has oppositional disorder, which direct eye contact in a moment of stress can feel traumatic. And so by making eye contact with the stuffed animal, I'm eliminating that, almost like a confrontation. And all I want to do is become incredibly welcoming and safe. And so by working through that stuffed animal, it just gives me that, gives a boundary for the child, empowers them. And it works for kids 18 months through 12. And I can make fun of myself really well. And so if a kid comes a little bit older and I say, I know this is silly, but you do not have to talk to stuffed animals if you don't want to. And often they want to. And I also find that kids who come into care, a really great, tool or hack, I like to say a foster care hack, is treat the child like they're about half their actual age. So if a child comes to me who's 8, just let your heart think of them as 4. It isn't condescending. It's simply allowing them to have the behavior of a 4-year-old and for you to have compassion towards that. And so sometimes somebody who's 12 might really want a stuffed animal, or a really soft blanket. So especially in that initial encounter, acting as if, anything's okay and anything I can do to create comfort.
I think that's a really important thing to frame with this, is that these children have experienced a lot of different trauma, and having that leading with empathy. And I love that hack of treat them like they're half the age of what they are, because it really just jumpstarts your empathy. So I love that. That's really, really cool. So Kim, I'd like to toss this question over to you. What do you think is the biggest misconception about the foster care system? Could you share with us what you think it is?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways I could answer this question. One, there's this oftentimes a misconception about the youth themselves, that they're bad kids or they did something wrong. And I think it's really important for people to know that children are in the system for no fault of their own, that they've had something traumatic happen to them that has brought them into the system, and that these are really good kids that need a lot of love and support and stability. And so I think from the standpoint of the children, I think that's a misconception. I think in the role that I'm in, I would like to point out the misconception of requirements to become a foster parent. I talk to a lot of foster families that feel like they need to be a certain type of person, or their family needs to look a certain way to become a foster parent. And we have children from all different backgrounds, and we need families from all different backgrounds. Single people can be foster parents, same-sex couples can be foster parents, grandparents can be foster parents. There's some basic requirements. You have to be 21 years of age. You have to pass the background checks. But generally speaking, I think that a lot of people think they have to be a certain type of family, and that's not true. So if people are listening today and you think you could be a loving, stable place for a family, that's what we need. And we can talk with you more about what that looks like. And then the one other thing I often hear from families is a financial misconception, that they think it costs money to become foster care licensed. And that is not true. It does not cost money to become foster care licensed. In fact, you do get a small stipend to help support the child. And, if you were to move from foster care into even adopting a child out of foster care, there are agencies that are contracted through the state that can take care of those adoption fees as well. So we don't want those things to be barriers to children getting into safe homes.
I think that's really important to make those notes, because there needs to be more foster care families to be able to provide these safe homes for them. And yes, so that's great to know that. Deirdre, I'd like to throw the same question out to you. What do you think is the biggest misconception about either the foster care system or related to your experiences as the foster parent?
I agree with, children. This is not the child's fault being so important, to reiterate and to really say. I think the other thing that I run into is, well, you're a saint, and no, I'm not a saint. I think that that's a misconception that somehow people who do foster care are extra special, and we're just people who show up. The great advice I got from a seasoned mom, a foster mom, many years, was you just got to show up. There's times where you're really showing up for a kid. It doesn't mean you have to show up perfectly. You can be in your pajamas, but you're showing up. So this misconception, you have to have it all together and you have to be polished, and no, you just have to be able to show up and really care about a kid. That's one thing. And I think the other piece, that when I was brainstorming with somebody who was interested in foster care, who thought, I can't do this, but she has amazing experience with a very specific type of disorder in a child. And I said, that is such a gift, because anybody who's advocated for a child, think about that, because that is, you are learning skills. And I think we need more people in the foster care world who are willing to share that knowledge of advocacy. And it doesn't mean that kids all have something going on with them, but every kid has something. And the more we have parents involved in foster care who are comfortable in advocacy and understand that side of things, I just really think there are hidden pockets of people that would be fabulous foster care providers who have simply walked through things with children and could give that experience to this group of kids.
That's awesome. So as a foster parent, do you find yourself talking to people about, like, in the role that you have, and have gotten people sparked, like, maybe I can do that because here's Deirdre doing it, and so maybe I could be something like that. Have you experienced that?
Yes, I joked with my licensing worker. I don't think she's watching this, but she said, I'd gotten a call from somebody else at the county who said, we never call people. We've had 13 families sign up this year to do this nuts and bolts course referencing the Otis family. And I said, do I get a brick? And they said, no, you just get more kids, and I said, okay, that's fine. But I think people, when they see other people out there serving in this way, people are attracted to that. And I think that is the most awesome thing. I mean, the more people can come forward, we can't, it obviously is fantastic. Also, you run into people at occupational therapy. You run into people. I worked with one child who needed a lot of dermatological surgery, things like that. So you become part of different networks where you run into people. And I think that with foster care, there's absolutely a reality that there's a lot of appointments, whether even these kids, it's trauma to be in foster care, right? There's no way around that. Even fantastic kids. I mean, but you have to be willing to walk with them to various appointments and show up with them for those things. And that can be challenging at times. So, but that's the reality of being willing to be a foster parent. I think that's a big part of it.
Well, let's lean into that a little bit, because my next question is about the challenges within the system, and I think the sheer amount of appointments, and I'm in the car all the time, so there's a lot that goes into that. Can you expand on that a little bit to give people a real idea of what that looks like, the visitation, the medical appointments, so people truly understand what that is?
I can start. I think, when my first placement in foster care, I remember, getting the call. I was in Target in the chip aisle, and I remember thinking, oh yes, I'm ready for this. And I said yes. And then the phone call kept going, and I realized I had to have something to write on, because they were going through all the different appointments that would be required with this placement. And I think that just is a good indication. But when I started attending the appointments, the reality is it is a support, whether it's occupational therapy, that is a place where I got a lot of ideas of how to work with this child. Depending on the placement, I often run visits without a social worker with parents, and it is very challenging. But the reality is some of those placements, when I look back on them, were the most successful. I really learned for example, 2 days ago, a grandma texted me and asked me what would be an appropriate thing to serve for food for a 2-year-old's birthday party. That's pretty cool. Here, this child left my home, and I have this relationship that's ongoing. The initial visit with that birth family was very stressful for me. But I think as you're going into foster care, it's very important to have your eyes open to the fact that you're also going to be in relationship with a birth family. And the goal is to get this tiny human, big human, huge human, depending on the child, back to this family. And that the best outcomes I've had are when I've been in relationship with that family, and that includes appointments. That's why I bring it up, because sometimes they meet you at an appointment at the cardiologist, or they meet you at an appointment at the pediatrician, and it's appointments, and it's also that logistical and emotional navigation with a birth family, and that's a big part of foster care.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And it does take practice as you navigate those conversations and build those relationships. But those relationships, like you're not just fostering a child, you're bringing a whole family with you. So thank you so much for that insight. Kim, for you, what are the biggest challenges in your role in what you do within the foster care system?
Yeah. I think I can speak to sort of a bigger picture of the challenges right now. Deirdre's obviously in the day-to-day parenting challenges, but right now with a pandemic going on, the reality is there are children in foster care with or without a pandemic. We just got the data from 2020, and there was a 22% decrease in children entering the system during the pandemic. We can't really speak to the reasons why yet. I think as we sort of shift back to normalcy, we may be able to sort of analyze that a little bit more as to why that might be. But there has, on a positive note, there's been a huge increase in the families interested in becoming foster parents during this time. And, again, why that is, I'm not entirely sure. My own personal thought is that, we've all been at home and we've had to slow down a little bit. And maybe this is something that families have been thinking about for many years. And they now have the ability to sort of gather the information. And, I think naturally we've all felt like there's so much happening around us in the world. How can we help? And this is a way that people feel they can help. And so it's important. I mean, we don't know if those numbers of children coming into care are going to increase again. We don't know, but we sure want to be prepared in case that is the case. So we're always trying to get more families to become foster parents. There have also been families that have had to put a pause on being foster parents. That might be because they have a household member that's at risk, and they can't risk having a child that maybe has been exposed to COVID. So I think there's been both positive things happening as well as challenges. And I'm hopeful that we're on the road to having families ready to take in children as we see those numbers shift in whatever way that they do.
That increase in awareness and people interested is probably Deirdre out there recruiting people. So I'd like to shift a little bit with this next question, and we'll start with you, Deirdre. Do you believe that there are enough checks and balances to protect all parties involved in the foster care system, and why or why not?
That's hard. No, I don't. I think one of the difficult things, I think, is there's very little recourse for a foster parent. So that the most effectual that I've been is when I have a strong connection with the placing social worker. So in foster care, the foster provider has a worker and the child has a worker. So when I say placing worker, I'm referring to the child's worker. And the child social worker, if I have a strong or a positive and a good working relationship with that person, I find I have a much better advocacy voice for the child. But the checks and balances, if that relationship isn't strong or I don't feel like my voice is respected, I feel very impotent or unable to help that child. For example, a very clear, say I really feel that a child has an allergy. This actually happened. And I happen to have a good worker who said, you know what? I think you might be right. I'm going to okay a medical visit. Now, if that worker had said, I think you're full of baloney, then the child suffers. And so I think it's very hard because there's no really accountability aside from that. And I see other states, and I see, I've read articles. I'm fascinated by how people, different places do things that seem to be giving a little bit more voice to foster parents. But as a foster parent, there are times where you feel very ineffectual because you don't really have a voice. You don't really have power for change. It's the birth family and it's the child's worker. Even when you get to court, occasionally there's guardian ad litem or, someone who comes forward who can advocate in behalf of the child. But I think that it would, over time, I hope I see more credence given to the voice or the opinion of a foster provider.
Yeah, as a foster parent as well, I agree with you on that. I think it would be a good, because we see the child all the time. They're with us, so we can offer beneficial insight. So, but also fostering relationships with the different workers and things like that also help. Kim, can you weigh in on this?
Yeah, I think it is a hard question to answer. I think we are having conversations as a foster care network often about giving foster parents a voice, because I do think that's important, and you're with those children more than anyone else. So I think those conversations are happening. I don't think that any system is perfect. I think that every system has work to do. I do know that the professionals that I'm working with on a day-to-day basis are passionate about the work we do and about the safety of the children. And I think that we are constantly reevaluating how we do things so that we can do better. So it's good to hear from foster parents and their experiences and how we can open those communication doors. I think that's important.
And that growth mindset of the whole system, and now how the system wants to continue to reevaluate and see how to improve. Kim, I'd like to toss this question over to you. And what specific areas do you think could be improved upon? This could be through the lens of additional support, resources, more recruitment for foster care providers, less of a reunification time. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say all of the above. I think that families having support and access to those supports is so important. That's obviously what we do at MinAdopt, but we still need to get our work out there even more so that people know we're here. We're here and available to provide education, to provide therapeutic support, to help navigate kinship situations. I think it's important that people know where those resources are and how to get them. I think that is one of the fears in becoming a foster parent, is that, will there be support for me? And so I think that's important. I think recruitment is really important. We need, as I mentioned earlier, we need families of all kinds. We need to be recruiting more families that are open to teenagers. We need to be recruiting more diverse families. That represent the children that are in care. We definitely need to be recruiting all the time because, as I mentioned, there's always going to be children in foster care. We would love for that not to be the case. We would love to not need families because that would mean there are no children in foster care. But the reality is there are. So I think we can always be growing and getting better at all of those things.
Thank you so much for that, Kim. Deidre, I'd like to flip the question over to you. What do you think would be where would you want to see more focused effort on improvement, and what particular area within the foster care system?
I think having one, when people go to trainings, there's this sense of, well, you'll never you'll never be asked to adopt. I hear that from a lot of people. Why should we keep going? I'll get a phone call. We went to the nuts and bolts, but we were told that we'll never adopt. And so we shouldn't keep going to this. And I don't know the answer to that, but I know that adoption happens often. I know the goal is reunification, but I feel like, so part one, I feel like there should be a different articulation of that. Yes, the goal is reunification, but the reality is we also need people who are open to adoption, because these kids do need permanency. And that's a very delicate dance, emotionally. But the reality is we need people who are willing to jump in and serve these kids to some degree, serve the community in this way, and be all in for unification, but open to adoption. That's a tall order, but I'd say that is the kind of the mindset you need to have. You're going in to be, and so the way that I like to speak to it, and I would love to see more of this energy in trainings, especially initial trainings of people who are interested. Think of this as getting on a boat, in a river. Think about riding these. This it's a beautiful thing to be in rapids. It's exciting. But you're definitely in motion. You are not going to have an outcome that you desire necessarily, but you need to be willing to be in motion with these kids. That's one thing. I also think we need people who are going into this understanding that they may be walking with teenagers. And I think that's hard to find. And I think one thing is, like I said before, finding people in groups such as a special needs group at a high school, finding people who are already really great at advocating for this group of kids. And because I really think they'd be great foster providers. My oldest son has FASD, reactive attachment disorder. And the navigation, the tears, what I have learned through that process, I don't think I could learn in the classroom, and the people I've met along the way. So I just know there are people out there who have experienced really deep challenges. And I just encourage those people to look into themselves and think, can I serve another kid in the way that I've learned about my own challenge that I went through with my own child, whether that's adopted or foster or biological, because those tools are just so valuable to the foster care world.
Thank you so much for that. So I'd like to give this next question over to you as well, Deirdre. We've talked about the challenges. We've talked about ways to improve, but can you tell us about the joys of being part of what have you seen as a foster parent, and give people a glimpse in, because there is a lot of joy in it.
Absolutely. I think, man, there's so many joys. We had a sibling set leave recently, and my family sat around. We have a round dining room table, which is fun for conversation. And we sat around and we just said, those girls were awesome. And just, the one just was really interested in books. And I had a daughter show her all her favorite books. And it was just, one of the joys is you get to meet amazing kids, and they come in and they get you re-excited about things. It's that idea of sometimes when people say going for a walk with a toddler, how much more fun it is because they jump in the puddle and they point out a flower. And the reality is these kids come into our lives, and I notice things of beauty in our household, in our family, that my eyes were closed to. So these kids all have different life perspectives. We had one kid who was Latino, and he knew how to cook, and he was like 8, and he showed us these things, and I got to go to the store with him. I mean, it is so mumuch fun to get to honor someone else's story, and you learn from their story, right? And I've learned so much about different Hmong traditions. I walked alongside a family who wanted to shave a 3-month-old's head, and I got to learn about those traditions with that family. It is such a joy. And I've gotten a lot of just props and gratitude also from birth families where unification happened. I mean, I'm not the bad guy. I get to go really have a relationship with these families, which I didn't anticipate going into foster care. I thought, our family would be sharing ourselves with a child. But the reality is we get to enter into relationship with this child's family sometimes. And yes, sometimes that's super, super hard. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But the times it's not is really beautiful, because you're seeing healing. You're seeing a family heal, possibly break a cycle. And even if that only happens maybe 1 out of 4 times, it's been life-changing for me.
That's I love those stories, especially about the 8-year-old that can cook. I mean, who wouldn't want that? That's amazing. Kim, how about you? What are the joys in the work that you do?
Yeah, so right now in my role, I'm so early on, but I do have some really great conversations with families that are just really new. Just it's their first phone call, like, tell me about this. I share stories that I hear from people like Deirdre about all the wonderful things that happen in these families. But previous to this work, I was more directly involved in families, and I would say that in my adoption and foster care career, some of the most joyful moments were being part of finalization hearings with teenagers finding permanency before aging out. We talked a little bit about how foster care and adoption do overlap, and that families, can be prepared or should be prepared that there might be an option to adopt these children, and to see these kids finding permanency before aging out of the system is just so wonderful and so joyful to be a part of.
Thank you so much for that insight. I think that's a huge aspect, that aging out part, to be able to find your forever home prior to that. That's a really important moment. So I'd like to toss this question over to you, Kim, to begin our wrap up. What can community members do to help support the foster care community, whether they are youth providers or social workers? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we talked about how on any given day, there's nearly 9,000 kids in foster care. So these are kids in our communities. We may not know that they're in our communities, but they are. They're going to school with our kids. They're playing at the parks with our kids. And so, with that many kids in the system, like, we all play a role in helping support those youth. And so whether it's becoming a foster family or, becoming a support to a foster family, like, how can you support the families that can do it if you can't, or supporting the organizations that are doing the work. There are ways that we can all support these youth. And if becoming a foster parent or even supporting some of these families isn't something you're able to do right now, what our hope at Minidopt is always is that you can become an advocate, that you can hear these stories and become an advocate, and know the importance of having safe and stable homes for these kids. I think that's the biggest thing that we could ask of you.
Help comes in very different forms. So Deirdre, how about you? What do you think would be a great way for the community to help the foster care system or foster parents as yourself, or directly to the youth or social workers?
Yeah, well, on a basic level, if you know someone who has a new foster child, celebrate them if you can. Make them a meal. Be kind. I think sometimes people don't want to talk about it because they're worried about offending someone. And I'd say anybody out there who has connections to someone providing foster care, lift them up. Get them a coffee card. Say great job. I mean, the same way you'd lift anyone else up. It has absolutely made my world. I know someone in our community brought me flowers when our foster daughter left. And it was a celebration after 18 months. Absolutely. But I was a puddle, and so just that I'm not, I think just giving support. And the other thing is, one year, I think I had 4 different newborns within a 12-month period, all who were detoxing from meth and other substances. That means no sleep. I mean, it's a lot on me and on my family. And so the few families that got together and just made some meals, because the reality is you still have a newborn, even if you didn't give birth just now. So I think just awareness, being willing to support. And then I think on a larger level, just positive language, whether you're an educator, whether you're someone in the street, that it's always great to say hi to someone, and support the family, support the kid, but don't say, well, what happened? What was wrong? Don't say things to the child that might make that child feel bad. Something like, well, what did their parents do? Are they in jail? For example, someone asked me on the street, I was scootering and pushing somebody in a stroller, and they said, oh, did they get, was it a drug bust? And the reality was it actually was, but I wasn't going to say that. That's not okay to the child. We have to be positive. We have to use good language. So the language I often say is, the family's getting healthy and we're helping out. It's very simple to use that language. And I think just to be aware that this is trauma, and our job as a community and as a foster provider is to be healing and to be supportive. And it may sound cliche, but I'm going to use that language every time, and that it doesn't mean that I don't value you or I'm not trying to give you information, but that my number one priority is going to be that child and how they feel.
I love that positive language aspect, that especially that go to, well, they're getting healthy and we're here to help. I love that. I'm probably going to take that. So I want to thank you both so much for your insights today. This has just been so valuable. What a great learning experience. We've gained a really stronger insight into the Minnesota foster care system because of the work that both of you have done and your insights. So I'd like to give you each an opportunity that you think is really important for our community to hear about. Kim, I'd love to start with you and then to end with Deirdre.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for having me. If anyone that is viewing is interested in becoming a foster parent, visit our website, mnadopt.org. If you want to gather information about foster care, there's an inquiry form on there that will connect you with myself as well as your county and agencies, so I can give you some more information so that you can become a Deirdre. And then if fostering isn't something that your family can do right now, there are other ways to help, even at MinAdopt here. We are currently doing a fundraiser for a back to school event. This is our third annual back to school event. We're trying to send as many foster care youth back to school shopping in August, something that a lot of these youth have never been able to do. And so you can find more information about that on our website as well. You can directly donate, or you can run, walk, bike, dance your way through a 5K, which will directly support that fundraising event as well. And lastly, if you can't do any of the other things, just be that advocate. That's what we ask of you.
Thank you so much for that, Kim. Deirdre, how about you? Any last words for our community members?
I think just thank you for your interest. Thank you for having me to speak. And I think for anybody viewing, you know your heart, you know where your strengths are. And if there's any way you can share your strengths with the foster care community, the community will be stronger because of it. I know that when I have kids, somebody offering to tutor in a subject I'm not great at, or somebody, offering to just listen in a safe way or sit outside with me while the kids play. I think if you have interested in doing foster care, I really strongly urge anyone to think about the mess in their own lives, the tools you learn from walking through that mess, and the beauty that came on the other side of those challenges. Because the reality is that is the heart of foster care, is getting through the mess and getting to the beauty, because every kid has it in them. But the willingness to walk through that mess and to advocate for a child and to be in relationship with a birth family, it's beautiful and it's a journey. But I really encourage you to think about that and appreciate the thoughts towards these kids in this community.
Thank you so much. I love that, the walking through the mess and ending with the beautiful things, because it really is. It's quite beautiful. And to our viewers at home, thank you so much for joining us today. For more programs like this, please check out our new website, www.9north.org. Please follow and share this on social media as well. We are charting new courses for our communities.